But Meg, if you look at the online version this morning of the Wall Street Journal, there is a family photo of Rob, Michelle, and their children, and everyone's smiling except Nick. Nick looks scary in this particular
in
family
all the
photos.
pictures.
Yeah, it's a little.
After Nick Reiner was taken into custody for the shocking case involving his parents, the internet erupted with theories and old clips began resurfacing everywhere. What once looked like innocent content suddenly felt dark and disturbing. In one 2016 video, Nick was caught saying he wanted to hurt a dog just because it barked a few times. An unsettling moment that many brushed off back then. Right after that, he admitted he had some deeply troubling thoughts that he needed to face. Words that now sound like a giant red flag that everyone missed. The behind-the-scenes footage from Being Charlie only made things more eerie. Rob Reiner appeared warm, patient, and eager to reach his son, but Nick's reactions were cold, detached, and distant. "I was never close to my dad," he said flatly, and it wasn't just talk. His body language screamed discomfort. Every look away, every stiff smile hinted that something inside him was breaking long before anyone noticed. Maybe the signs were there the whole time. When someone jokes about cruelty or shows zero emotion toward family, it only takes one moment for everything to spiral. "Sometimes I just go out to gather my sick thoughts," he once admitted.
Sometimes I just come out to gather my sick thoughts.
And now, that line feels chilling beyond belief. An old 2016 clip came flooding back online after the tragedy, and it made people's skin crawl. It showed Nick Reiner, the son of Rob and Michelle, staring blankly into the camera with hollow eyes and a calmness that felt almost unreal, like someone balancing between control and total collapse. What once looked like a simple recording now feels like a haunting message everyone ignored. "Sometimes I just come out to gather my sick thoughts," Nick muttered, as the camera followed him through the quiet, expensive streets of Brentwood. The peaceful neighborhood, the neat lawns, the tall palm trees only made his eerie words hit harder. The whole thing was filmed documentary style, which added to the unease. When asked to introduce himself, Nick snapped back with a strange defiance. He wouldn't say his name, almost as if rejecting who he was, disconnecting from the world around him. "Most people know me," he said, his tone laced with arrogance and paranoia. It sounded like someone losing grip on reality. Then came the line that froze everyone. "I'm a snail and I will never fail. You'll have to bail me out of jail." At the time, it seemed like a weird joke. But looking back, it feels like a dark warning he didn't even understand himself. Later clips showed Nick and his sister Romy laughing hollowly, smoking, and showing signs of a life spiraling out of control. Some scenes even hinted at substance use, leaving viewers uneasy. At one point, Nick admitted flatly, "I have a severe personality disorder," a confession that few around him seemed to take seriously. And when a dog wandered onto the set, Nick's reaction suddenly shifted, sharp, tense, and unsettling, as if something inside him snapped for just a second. "I'll go hurt that dog," Nick said in a chillingly calm tone. No shouting, no anger, just pure emptiness. The calmness made it all the more disturbing. In that moment, it was clear something inside him had already begun to fracture. The clip, filmed in 2016 during the promotion of Being Charlie, a movie inspired by Nick's real-life battles with addiction, now feels like an eerie preview of the darkness that was quietly growing behind the scenes. Ironically, while the movie was praised as a story of recovery and hope, reality told a far different tale. Behind the bright lights and Hollywood smiles, the cracks were spreading. And if that clip made you uneasy, the next one was downright terrifying. Hours after the shocking act involving his parents, surveillance footage caught Nick inside a gas station.
A drink at a gas station moments before he was arrested. This is an ABC News video. Here he is. Once again, he's got a bag over his left shoulder, it appears, and he's kind of meandering around a convenience store, and again, does not look out of his mind, deranged in any way, disturbed. This is after, again, the murder.
And what stood out most was how normal he looked. He wore a black and green jacket with white stripes, jeans, black shoes, a baseball cap, and a bright red backpack slung over one shoulder. There was no panic, no rush. He moved through the aisles like any other customer, picked up a sports drink, and calmly waited in line. Witnesses later said he seemed quiet and polite, which made the whole situation even more chilling in hindsight. After paying, Nick stepped outside and crossed to the other side of the gas station, standing under the streetlight with that same eerie composure. Then, at around 9:15 p.m., everything shifted in seconds. Multiple LAPD cars, some unmarked, roared into the station, sirens wailing and lights flashing across the night sky. The calm street was instantly flooded with chaos. Officers surrounded Nick, moving in swiftly and with precision. As they restrained him under the bright lights, he didn't fight or yell. He just stood there, silent, motionless, and expressionless, like a man who had already left his emotions somewhere far behind. Nick didn't run, didn't fight. He simply raised his hands when told to, his eyes empty, his face unreadable, as if he had accepted this moment long before it happened. The eerie calm that surrounded him made the whole arrest scene unforgettable. It marked the end of a long, tragic spiral, a story where quietness and control hid something deeply broken beneath the surface. As he stood there, still and detached, many watching the footage wondered, who was this person really? How could someone appear so lifeless in such a moment? But the darkness didn't stop there. Another clip soon surfaced, one that showed Nick's unsettling side even more clearly. "You won't want to make me angry,"
I get crazy. I get crazy.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
You don't want to set me off.
he warned during a 2016 AOL Build series interview while promoting Being Charlie. The difference between father and son that day couldn't have been sharper. Rob Reiner sat beside him, the image of a loving, protective father. Every glance toward Nick carried warmth and care, his tone softening whenever he mentioned his son's name. It was the voice of someone trying to heal old wounds, a father who believed love could still fix what fame and addiction had broken. Nick, however, seemed like he was somewhere else entirely. His answers were short, flat, and emotionless. He looked straight ahead, rarely making eye contact with anyone, not even his father. There was a coldness there, a distance that made the room heavy with tension. It wasn't shyness, it was detachment. When the interviewer asked about their relationship and his childhood, Nick said quietly, "We didn't connect much when I was young." No elaboration, no warmth, just a hollow statement that froze the entire audience. Rob's eyes filled with sadness as he tried to bridge the silence his son left behind. Then came the shocking part. Nick revealed he had been to rehab 18 times. He didn't describe drugs as pleasure or escape, but as a way to silence what he called the noise, a storm of thoughts he couldn't control. It was a heartbreaking glimpse into how deep his struggles ran, shaped by pressure, insecurity, and pain he never found words for. Rob later admitted he had made mistakes, trusting experts over his own instincts as a father. He tried to help through structure and discipline, but it only built more walls between them. That love, meant to heal, ended up feeling like punishment to a son already lost in his own chaos. When the topic turned to addiction and homelessness, Nick's tone was chillingly flat, like someone reading a report, not recalling a painful past. "I was homeless in Maine, New Jersey, Texas. I slept outside many nights," he said without a tremor in his voice. There was no emotion, no hesitation, just cold, dry facts that landed like ice. It was as if the pain had burned out long ago, leaving only the ashes of memory behind. Throughout the talk, Nick's honesty was raw but unnerving. Beneath his calm surface, there was something volatile, a quiet storm ready to burst. When the host tried to spin his sobriety into a feel-good success story, Nick quickly cut through the illusion. His tone warned that both he and his father had sides that could turn dark if pushed too far. The truth was clear. Being Charlie might have been about healing, but real life doesn't follow a script. The resentment never truly left. Nick admitted that no matter how hard his father tried, he still felt emotionally distant. Rob's strict adherence to rehab rules made Nick feel more like a patient than a son. Their 2016 attempt at reconciliation on camera wasn't a breakthrough. It was a pause in a painful cycle that kept replaying. Every conversation seemed to scratch open old scars. In another 2016 interview, Nick appeared tense from the very start. His body was rigid, his arms folded or stiffly resting in his lap, as if he was trying to hold himself together.
Well, I try to be funny whenever I can, but I don't really know.
His face stayed blank, eyes flat, no warmth, no spark. There was an invisible wall between him and everyone in the room. When asked what it was like to work with his father, Nick replied in a low, emotionless tone, "Not too difficult for me. It was a fairly pleasant experience." His words felt mechanical, his gaze shifting toward the floor. No smile, no gestures, just silence that spoke volumes. Meanwhile, Rob Reiner sat beside him, visibly weighed down by regret. His honesty was painful yet sincere. He admitted that in trying to help his son, he had trusted experts instead of instincts. "I should have stayed quiet and listened to him," Rob said softly, acknowledging the mistake of turning love into discipline. His words carried the weight of years of guilt, a father realizing too late that control can sometimes push love away. But Nick didn't flinch. He didn't comfort him or even look his way. His stillness felt haunting, like he was only half present in his own story. When asked again about addiction or filming difficulties, he simply repeated, "Not hard at all. It was a fairly good experience." The repetition was cold, robotic, as if the emotion had been erased from his vocabulary. His eyes wandered, distant, lost somewhere only he could see. To everyone watching, it felt like Nick had stopped fighting pain and simply retreated from it completely. No anger, no tears, no warmth, just emptiness. Even as Rob tried to frame their bond through the art of filmmaking, calling Nick the heart and soul of the movie, the distance between them remained painfully visible. It was love and loss coexisting in one frame, a father reaching out and a son already gone somewhere unreachable. Rob's voice softened as he spoke about his son. "Whenever I look over, it's my boy. That never goes away." But every word of love seemed to bounce off a wall Nick had built long ago. His replies were short, mechanical nods, not out of disrespect, but exhaustion, like someone too tired to keep pretending everything was fine. Dark humor became Nick's armor. It was his way of mocking the pain before it could swallow him whole. When he described his experiences in rehab, he did it with unnerving detachment, turning tragedy into a twisted joke. "It's like seeing who goes first, the addiction or the person," he quipped, as though laughter could drown out the echo of suffering. For him, humor wasn't healing. It was survival. Rob, on the other hand, used humor to bridge the gap, to keep the room light when it was heavy with unspoken pain. But Nick's laughter had a sharper edge. It wasn't joy, it was defiance. Every fidget, every glance away, every fleeting smile exposed a restlessness that no one around him seemed to truly understand. Beneath the jokes and stillness was a man frozen in the same cold, sterile spaces where his struggles first began. Rob tried to reach him through conversation. Politics, social issues, anything that wasn't personal. It was his way of breathing in a room that had grown suffocating. He spoke passionately about hate in society, unaware that a different kind of darkness was quietly growing right beside him. Nick's response was chilling, total silence. No words, no expression, just a stillness that felt like the calm before a storm. His world had already fallen apart, and no film, no applause, no fatherly speech could rebuild what was lost. Then came the next haunting chapter, Nick's first court appearance. The date was December 17th, 2025. Cameras captured every second as he entered the Los Angeles Superior Court, facing charges that stunned the world. The hearing had already been delayed once because he wasn't cleared to be transported from jail. When he finally appeared, Nick was wearing a heavy blue anti-suicide vest with no shirt underneath. His wrists and ankles were shackled as he was seated behind a glass partition. His body was stiff, shoulders tense, his gaze locked forward. Not once did he glance at the crowd, the press, or even his own legal team. Throughout the hearing, his expression never changed. He blinked rarely, his face set like stone. When the charges were read aloud, there was no visible reaction. No nod, no twitch, no tremor. The silence in the room grew thick. What some called composure, others recognized as something far deeper. A complete emotional void. Finally, the judge asked if he understood his rights and agreed to waive a speedy trial. Nick spoke for the first and only time.
2026.
Yes, Your Honor. 3 words. Flat, toneless, lifeless. That was it. Afterward, he returned to silence, staring blankly as lawyers and officials continued speaking around him, as if none of it concerned him at all. It was the kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it lingers long after, leaving everyone wondering if they had just witnessed a soul that had already given up. Nick didn't enter a plea, and his trial was rescheduled for January 7th, 2026 at the request of his defense team. Bail was denied, meaning he would remain behind bars until further notice. His attorney, Alan Jackson, a well-known Los Angeles defense lawyer, appeared cautious and composed as he addressed the court. He described the situation as extremely complex and urged the public not to jump to conclusions too quickly. Jackson asked for more time to prepare and requested that Nick undergo undergo a full mental health evaluation, quietly signaling that his client's mental state would play a key role in the case. Investigators later revealed that Nick had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and was on psychiatric medication in the months leading up to the tragedy. In the final weeks before everything unraveled, his prescriptions were reportedly changed, and according to relatives, those adjustments made him more unpredictable and emotionally unstable. Years of illness, addiction, and mental turmoil seemed to merge into a dangerous spiral that no one fully noticed until it was too late. When the short hearing ended, Nick was escorted back to jail for continued observation under strict supervision. As he was led away, the cameras caught his face through the glass, head slightly bowed, eyes empty. It wasn't just the nature of the charges that chilled viewers, but the eerie sight of someone who seemed hollowed out long before anything happened. Later, another clip surfaced, this time showing Nick reflecting on his years in rehab. His voice was cold, heavy, and distant, like someone speaking from the ashes of a fire. He said that rehab hadn't always been his choice. It was something done to him, often pushed by his parents out of love and fear. What they saw as salvation, he saw as control. He explained that those experiences left him feeling trapped, not physically, but emotionally. "I know they loved me," he said quietly, but that love became a cage. The more they tried to save him, the more he felt stripped of the right to fail on his own terms. For Nick, music had once been his lifeline, his escape, his breath. But even that became suffocating when every creative impulse was watched, managed, or doubted. What was supposed to set him free now reminded him of the walls closing in. Nick admitted he didn't blame his parents for caring. He blamed the lack of trust. "They didn't think I could stand on my own," he said, not with anger, but with resignation. "They meant well, but it made me feel weak." His words revealed a heartbreaking contradiction. A son who longed for independence but couldn't function without the safety net he resented. At one point in the interview, his tone shifted, his speech quickened as if he were afraid he'd lose his nerve. "I'm lucky to have parents who care about me," he said. But moments later, he added softly, "Every time I used, I felt awful guilt." Then came the line that broke everyone listening. "Right now, I think they must be thinking about me, not out of fear of what I did, but because I disappointed them." Nick didn't ask for forgiveness. He just said, "I want peace." But peace never came. That longing only deepened the turmoil inside him. The more he sought calm, the more guilt wrapped around him like a chain. Love, in his case, wasn't a rope pulling him out of darkness. It became the weight that dragged him further down. And then came the words of someone who saw it all before the end, a close family friend named Barry. He spent 5 quiet days with the Reiners just before everything fell apart, visiting their home during the premiere week of The Perfect Gamble. He said those days were peaceful, even joyful, filled with laughter and normal family moments. Looking back, Barry said it felt almost unreal, and the calm before a storm no one could have predicted. Nick, he recalled, seemed distant, yet polite, calm but unreadable. It was as if he was there in body but somewhere far away in spirit. Barry remembered Nick vividly. Not as the angry, unstable man later seen in headlines, but as a quiet, fragile soul wandering through the Reiner home like a ghost that no one dared disturb.
Because I'd think, oh, they're thinking about me right now. They want me to do good.
Recalled seeing Nick sitting in the corner of the living room, strumming an old guitar, lost in thought while his parents moved about the house trying to keep things light and normal. He didn't talk much, Barry said softly, but when he did, it felt like every word cost him effort. Rob and Michelle, on the other hand, seemed genuinely happy to have their son home. They cooked dinner together, watched films in the evening, and even took a short walk around the neighborhood one afternoon. From the outside, it looked like a family on the mend. There were small smiles, gentle jokes, and the kind of warmth that made guests think everything was finally settling down. But behind those calm moments, there was something off, something heavy that couldn't be named. Barry noticed it in the way Nick avoided eye contact with his father. Rob would try to start a conversation, asking about music, films, or how therapy was going, and Nick would answer with short sentences or quiet nods. He wasn't rude, just detached, as if words were a burden he didn't want to carry anymore. When laughter filled the room, he smiled politely, but his eyes stayed blank. It was a smile that didn't quite reach his soul. Michelle, ever the mother, hovered gently around him. She would fix his plate, refill his glass, and make small talk, always keeping her tone soft and soothing. Barry could sense her worry, though. It was in the way she glanced at Nick every few minutes, like someone watching a fragile flame, afraid it might flicker out at any second. She looked tired, Barry recalled. Tired in a way only a mother can be when she's been scared for too long. During one of those nights, Barry and Rob stayed up late talking in the kitchen after everyone had gone to bed. Rob spoke with quiet sadness about how he felt helpless. He had spent his whole life creating stories that moved millions of people, yet couldn't find the right words to reach his own son. "I thought time would fix it," he told Barry, "but maybe time just made the walls taller." The next morning, Barry woke up early and saw Nick sitting on the patio alone, staring at the horizon. A mug of cold coffee rested beside him, untouched. When Barry greeted him, Nick nodded and said, "Morning," without turning his head. For a few moments, they sat in silence. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Nick said, "It's weird when you start to feel like you're not really part of your own story anymore." Barry didn't know what to say. It was one of those sentences that carried too much weight for small talk. Later that day, he mentioned it to Rob, who just sighed and said, "Yeah, he says things like that sometimes." There was resignation in his tone, the sound of a man who had been fighting an invisible war for years. By the 5th day, Barry had to leave for another engagement. Before going, he hugged the family and told them he hoped to see them again soon. Rob smiled faintly and said, "You always have a place here." Michelle thanked him for visiting, and Nick just gave a small wave from the staircase. It was brief, but there was something almost final about it. A silent farewell no one recognized at the time. A week later, news broke, and Barry said he dropped the phone when he saw the headline. "It didn't seem possible," he said later. "I just seen them. They looked normal." But normal had been an illusion, a fragile mask stretched over years of pain, fear, and silence. In the weeks that followed, the Reiner family's story became a media storm. Analysts and reporters dissected every frame of old footage, every quote, every interview. People debated who to blame, what could have been done, and whether anyone could have truly predicted what was coming. But those who had known Nick personally described him in more human terms. Not as a monster, but as a broken person who had run out of ways to cope. Psychologists who reviewed the case noted how untreated mental struggles, combined with fame, pressure, and family expectations, can create a silent pressure cooker. He lived between two worlds, one expert said, the one his parents built and the one he couldn't escape. Every attempt to fix him may have only deepened his feeling of failure. Rob, in the aftermath, reportedly withdrew from public life for several months. Friends said he spent most of his days in quiet reflection, avoiding interviews or appearances. Those close to him shared that he spoke of his son with tenderness and sorrow, not anger. He wanted Nick to be remembered for his heart, one friend said, not for his pain. The Reiner home in Beverly Hills eventually became a place of stillness. Neighbors said the once busy driveway stayed empty for weeks. The laughter that used to spill out during family gatherings was gone. What remained was a lingering sense of disbelief, the kind that only time and silence can hold. Barry returned once more, months later, just to leave flowers by the front gate. He said he stood there for a long time, replaying those 5 days in his mind. The dinners, the small smiles, the last wave on the stairs. "It's strange," he said softly, "how normal everything felt right before everything stopped being normal forever."
It's hard for me to even comprehend this stuff, but mental illness is a terrible thing.
And that's what made the story of the Reiners so haunting. And it wasn't just about tragedy, it was about love that tried its best, about a family that fought to stay together, and about a son who slipped through the cracks despite everyone's efforts to hold him up. A reminder that sometimes the loudest cries for help are silent, hidden in the pauses between words, in the smiles that don't reach the eyes, and in the quiet moments when someone says, "I'm fine," but their soul is already fading away. In the months that followed, the story of Nick Reiner and his parents became one of Hollywood's most haunting tragedies, not just for the shocking headlines, but for the heartbreaking humanity behind them. What unfolded wasn't a tale of glamour or fame, but a portrait of how deep pain can hide behind the calmest faces. The entertainment world, once so familiar with Rob Reiner's laughter and storytelling genius, suddenly found itself speechless. Friends, actors, and filmmakers who had known the family for decades began piecing together small moments, replaying every memory, searching for signs they had missed. Industry insiders described Rob as a man who had carried a quiet ache long before this happened, an ache born from years of trying to balance love and helplessness. He was the kind of father who would do anything for his kids, one colleague recalled, but sometimes love isn't enough when the person you love is fighting their own mind. Those who had seen Rob and Nick together in public said their relationship was complex, a mix of affection, guilt, and misunderstanding. They would smile for cameras, exchange short hugs, and then drift apart like two people speaking different emotional languages. In the wake of the tragedy, Rob and Michelle's circle of friends began reflecting on their own families. Many said it made them realize how fragile human connection can be, how mental health struggles can exist quietly, even in homes filled with success and comfort. "We all thought they were fine," one friend admitted. "They had money, careers, and a son who seemed to be turning things around. But pain doesn't care about appearances." Documentaries and interviews soon followed, each trying to make sense of the timeline. The early signs, the rehab years, the distant interviews, the quiet breakdown. Clips from Nick's old appearances resurfaced across social media, with millions of viewers analyzing his tone, his eyes, his awkward pauses. Some saw a warning. Others saw a young man who simply couldn't find his place in the world. What united everyone was the same lingering question: how could something like this happen in plain sight? Mental health experts were invited to discuss the case on major networks, calling it a wake-up call about untreated trauma and the pressures of growing up in the public eye. They pointed out how the entertainment industry often glamorizes success, but rarely acknowledges the emotional toll it takes on families. "It's not about fame," one therapist said. "It's about the silent expectations that come with it, the pressure to be perfect, even when you're breaking inside." Rob Reiner himself avoided interviews for months, retreating from Hollywood's spotlight. Friends said he spent most of his days in quiet reflection, rewatching old family videos and rereading scripts that Nick had once helped him edit. One of those close to him shared, "He's haunted by the what-ifs. What if he had stayed closer? What if he had ignored the experts and just listened as a father?" The guilt was said to be unbearable at times, not because Rob didn't love his son, but because he loved him too much, in a way that turned into fear and overprotection. Meanwhile, Nick's name became a case study in how fragile the line between healing and collapse can be. His journals, later examined by investigators, revealed a young man torn between two selves, one that longed for peace and another that felt permanently trapped. He wrote about feeling invisible, about trying to prove his worth, and about the crushing guilt of disappointing his parents. In one note, he described love as a mirror I can't look into without seeing everything wrong with me. Those words shook people to their core. They showed not a villain, but a person drowning silently while the world assumed he was swimming. That was the hardest truth for everyone who knew the Reiners. The understanding that tragedy doesn't always come from hate, but sometimes from hearts too heavy to carry their own weight. Michelle's side of the family spoke rarely, but when they did, they described her as a mother who had given everything she could. She never stopped believing he would get better, one relative said. Even when he pushed her away, she thought one day he'd come back and say, "Mom, I'm okay now." She lived for that hope. That hope, sadly, became her undoing. A reminder that love, no matter how strong, can't always cure what's broken within someone. In the months after, tributes poured in for Rob and Michelle. Not the usual Hollywood glamour, but heartfelt letters, messages, and quiet gestures. Neighbors left flowers at the gate. Fans wrote notes about how Rob's movies had changed their lives. And even former colleagues of Nick's reached out privately to share their grief. It wasn't just mourning, it was reflection. People began talking more openly about mental health, family pressure, and the dangers of silence. By early 2026, a foundation was quietly established in Rob and Michelle's memory to support young adults battling mental illness and addiction. The initiative, started by close family friends, was meant to turn heartbreak into purpose, to ensure that others struggling in silence would have a place to turn. The first event drew hundreds of attendees, many of whom shared stories that echoed the Reiners' pain. Parents losing children, siblings trying to help loved ones, friends who saw signs but didn't know what to do. Through it all, one truth became clear. The Reiner story wasn't just about fame or tragedy. It was about the unseen battle so many families face behind closed doors. The cameras may have captured the aftermath, but they missed the years of quiet despair, the small gestures of love, the desperate attempts to hold a family together before everything fell apart. When asked later how he wanted people to remember his family, a close friend of Rob said simply, "Not for how it ended, but for how hard they tried." And maybe that's the most honest way to see it, because behind every headline, behind every clip or interview, there was a father who loved deeply, a mother who never gave up hope, and a son who was fighting demons no one could see. In the end, their story stands as a somber reminder that success doesn't shield anyone from suffering, that silence can be louder than words, and that sometimes the hardest battles are fought inside the minds of those who seem the calmest. It's a story that broke hearts, but it also opened eyes, forcing people everywhere to look closer, listen harder, and never assume that someone's smile means they're okay. He looked like a man finally at peace, healthy, calm, and present. During those days, Nick sat with his parents at the dinner table, talking about everyday things. They laughed, played tennis, watched TV together, and even did simple chores around the house. To anyone observing, it looked like a family rediscovering balance. The kind of warm normalcy that makes you believe everything is finally okay. Barry, who spent several evenings with them, later said that what haunted him wasn't what he saw, but what he didn't. There were no visible cracks, no arguments, no signs of despair. Everything felt too normal, he admitted. Too peaceful. That eerie calm, he would later realize, wasn't healing. It was the quiet before something unthinkable. Rob and Michelle, by all accounts, were loving parents who never gave up on their son. They supported him through every relapse, every rehab stay, every promise of change. Barry emphasized that it wasn't about money or status, it was about love. They poured every ounce of hope into helping Nick, believing that this time things would be different. From luxurious recovery programs to private therapy sessions, they tried everything love could offer, but that's what made it so tragic. It wasn't the absence of love that led to the collapse. It was the heartbreaking reality that sometimes even the strongest love can't save someone from themselves. There was too much love, Barry reflected. It just didn't fit. He described Rob as endlessly patient, a man full of compassion who never turned his back on his child, no matter how dark things became. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, life inside the Reiner home appeared picture perfect. Family dinners were warm and filled with laughter. Michelle's gentle voice carried through the house. Rob often cracked jokes to keep spirits light. And Nick, though quiet, seemed calm. Too calm. He helped around the house, took out the trash, washed dishes, even joined them for late-night movies. From the outside, everything appeared peaceful. Yet in hindsight, Barry said it was the silence that scared him most. Not anger, not chaos. Silence. The quiet smiles, the tired nods, the emotionless tone when Nick spoke about life. All of it now looked like the warning signs everyone missed. It wasn't rage that scared me, Barry explained. It was the emptiness. Reviewing old footage, those warning signs became painfully clear. The cold interviews, the blank stares, the detached voice that described addiction as if it belonged to someone else. It wasn't dramatic or violent. It was quiet, gradual, and invisible. That's what made it so terrifying. It was the story of someone who didn't explode. He faded. Barry said he'll never forget the final night. They had dinner, watched a comedy, and talked about the new year. Nick even smiled when his father made a joke about his cooking. Everything seemed fine, but now Barry realizes that peace wasn't safety, it was surrender. The Reiner family story became a chilling reflection on what it means to truly see someone. How often do we mistake stillness for stability? How many times do we overlook emotional withdrawal because there's no visible chaos? The warning signs aren't always loud. Sometimes they're hidden in plain sight. Looking back now, every small gesture, Nick's empty gaze, his detached tone, his quiet presence, told a story of someone already slipping away. Not out of hatred or rebellion, but out of exhaustion. He was tired of trying to heal, tired of disappointing, tired of pretending that love alone could drown out the noise in his head. And so, this ending isn't just about tragedy, it's a lesson. A painful reminder that silence can be the loudest cry for help. That emotional distance, even in loving homes, can be deadly if ignored. Barry's memories of those warm family dinners, the peaceful afternoons, and the laughter that once filled the Reiner home now serve as a haunting echo of what happens when quiet pain goes unseen. So now it's your turn. After seeing these moments, what do you think was the biggest warning sign? Was it the silence, the emotionless tone, or the way he spoke about life like it didn't belong to him? Let's talk about it in the comments below, because recognizing these signs could save someone else's life one day. And if you want to keep following deep stories like this, real human moments behind the cameras, the psychology, and the heartbreak no one talks about, make sure to like, subscribe, share, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.